Okay, let's see where we're at. Last time we reviewed chapter 1 again to make sure that everybody was kind of caught up. And we do have chapter 1 homework due tomorrow. Does anybody have any questions about that homework and what is expected from that homework at all?
I haven't done the video of the explanation here.
It's okay, it's due tomorrow, so you're good to go. All right, if there are no questions with that, we need to move on to the next chapter so that we can get started on a project here eventually. The objective before the end of this week is to finish up chapter 2 and get started on chapter 3, at which time we will actually begin to choose a project for the class. And the way that we do the project choice, I have some ready-made projects, some of which are projects done previously in this class and not completed. And so we have the chance to complete a project. I also have a new project. I have a new project possibility that we talked about last week. And then we also take suggestions from students on projects. And then we, if we have a pretty clear consensus, we just go with it. If not, we go through some process of choosing the best project for the class. And then we will go through the process of actually applying the engineering design process to a real project and learning about the engineering design process in that way. So chapter 2 in our engineering design process book is mostly about communication and kind of teamwork kind of stuff. And there's a lot of tools that we learn about in chapter 2 that are going to be part of the homework. So if we just go to the chapter 2 homework, we should be able to see these. Yeah. So the first one is a task list. The second one is a Gantt chart. And the third one is a PERT chart that that you're going to be constructing. And we're going to learn about what these are today and also on Wednesday. Chapter 2 in the book is called Essential Transferable Skills. And the very first part of this chapter is working in teams, how to form a team, how to create leadership in a team. And then it goes on to how to organize a project using some different tools. And then the very last part of it is actually about technical writing, presentation skills. And we've already talked about presentation skills a little bit. Time management is a big part of this organizational chapter, but this is kind of like some basic skills of teamwork and projects in general. Not anything that's specifically engineering based, but there are skills that are used by all kinds of people that work on projects and work in teams. So today what we want to start off by doing is talking about what makes a good team and what makes good leaders in teams. There's no real correct answer to this. I've been around many projects and worked on many teams, and I've seen teams and projects go 100 different ways. And I've never seen one single way of running a team or a project that has been just hands down above and beyond and better than the rest. Pretty much every example that I've seen of teams and projects have had their upsides and their downsides. And I'll give you some examples before we start discussing your thoughts on this. Of course, we want to listen to them working on their projects in the halls. So the very first, probably my very first experiences with teams and projects and things like this probably had to do with sports teams and projects at school. And that's probably how most people are introduced to working in teams and working on projects. And I would say the first team that I really was cognizant of the inner workings of was the swim team that I joined in high school. And the swim team that I joined in high school was very much a top-down structure. We had a coach who was pretty much in charge of everything, and whatever they said went. You know, that was kind of, he was like the dictator of the team. And there were some students who were older students, more experienced students who participated a little bit in running the team, mostly in non-essential duties. It was a very top-down approach, and the top-down approach has its ups and downs. What do you imagine the advantages of a top-down approach for a team or some kind of an organization are? What are the good things about somebody being in charge and telling everybody else how things are going to go? What do you think? Go ahead.
Well, there's also a con to this point that there can be less arguing about ideas because there's that discipline aspect of what they said goes, and there's a reason why they're in that place. So I'll trust this leader.
Yeah. So the whole the problem that you might have with dissension, conflicting voices, confusion, you know, that stuff kind of goes out the window. Whatever the top dog says goes. Everybody just follows that and does what they're told, does what they're supposed to do. Things get done. It's very efficient. It's very effective in many cases. Yeah. So then you said that could also be a downside. What would be the downside of having that one person in charge?
Well, fewer. I can't remember exactly what it's called. There's like a bunch of in these group scenarios of names of things that happen. You probably would be able to name what I'm talking about. But basically, when everybody's too scared to challenge their leader because they don't want them to be mad, or they don't want to disappoint them, or they just don't want to go against the flow of everything. So nobody presents any new ideas, or says when things are going wrong.
Yeah, so it's essentially a repressed group of workers or group of participants, right? Their ideas are repressed, creativity is repressed, and initiative is repressed.
I do think that the quality of the outcome depends completely on the highest hierarchical position. So if the president of the project or the leader of the project is not competent, the project outcome will not be competent, not be there. So you risk having someone that doesn't know what they're doing at the top and damaging or risking the overall performance of the project.
Right, but when you say competent, competence is a very vague word, right? Competent in what?
In whatever the project's for.
So if it's a computer programming project, they need to be competent in computer programming.
No, not necessarily.
Okay.
They have to be competent as a decision maker.
Okay.
I want to use the word leader, but I don't think that's a requirement. They have to be good managers.
Okay. So management maybe is important at the top. Competence in certain qualities that are going to help make decisions, help them to make decisions may be important. It's difficult, really, I think, to understand the best things needed or the necessary things for a team or a group to succeed. I don't honestly think there's a way to define it. I think that every situation has its own very specific set of circumstances that dictates a lot of what means success, what success means, and how to go about it. And the people themselves dictate that. I hear a lot of people say, in order to be a great leader, you must know how to delegate. Well, I think that's true for some people. But I think there are some people that are terrible at delegating, but they're incredible leaders. They just happen to do a lot of things themselves, and they happen to do them well. And sometimes that just works. It's kind of crazy to me for people to try to pin down, what is the best way to do this, when really usually the people that are trying to do that have never actually succeeded in anything except telling other people how to succeed at things. And that in itself is not really success, in my opinion. There are entire companies that are purveying this knowledge of how to succeed, but the only thing that company has done is succeeding in making other people believe that they know what they're talking about, which is just asinine, in my opinion. They have an entire company whose people who are running this company are telling other people how to succeed, and they've never actually succeeded at running a company except this company, which just tells other people how to succeed. So their only success is telling people how to succeed. Is that success, right? Go ahead.
So, just on follow up, do you mean in the same sense of writing a book that's like how to make $1 million, but you haven't made $1 million, but then you make $1 million off of selling that book?
Yeah, a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of thing. Yeah, that happens all the time. Of course, for every one book written by somebody on how to make $1 million that makes $1 million, there are a million others that didn't make $10, right? And so in some way they are obviously successful, but are they really going to teach you how to be successful? Because can you do what they did? Write a book about making $1 million and make $1 million writing a book. So these kinds of things are often circular traps. Understanding leadership, I think, is extremely difficult, if not entirely impossible. Understanding success is extremely difficult, if not entirely impossible. I think understanding ourselves and trying to understand others is more important. And that's, I think, a more achievable goal as well. But so if we're talking about successful things, successful teams, or successful projects we've been a part of, that's a good place to start. We try to understand what made something successful, how we contributed to that success, how other people contributed to that success, how the team worked together for that success, what kinds of things happened. And so I go to the second, maybe probably the most successful thing I did in school, which was probably I was in a band. I was in the band, the marching band, the symphonic band, the symphonic orchestra. And our music instructor, who was kind of in charge of all of these things, had a very different approach than the swim coach. His approach was very much about doing the things that he needed to do and getting other people to help him with things that he didn't have to do, the things that weren't required that he be the head honcho on. And he looked a lot to parents, but he just didn't go to any parent. He got to know the parents and he recognized them for their strengths. And then he kind of naturally allowed parents to gravitate towards their strengths and then turned those things over to them almost entirely. And he came into a music program that was struggling and that was weak and had very little success. Before he came into the music program at the high school, the trophies the trophies of the high school consisted of like 2 or 3 small trophies that had been earned 20 years prior to him arriving. When he retired, which I think he either did just recently or he's about to do, his trophy room takes up an entire classroom and consists of hundreds of trophies that are like, some of them are 7 or 8 feet tall. And we earned so many trophies just by the end of my 4 years that we had to actually designate an entire room just for trophies. And that was only 4 years in, 5 years into his teaching in music. They've now become essentially a powerhouse of marching and performing in Northern California. Everyone knows our high school for its success. He also was a big believer in teaching students to be leaders in every way that they can without compromising the success of the program. And so he had people starting off as leaders from their freshman year or even before that. He would go into the junior high schools and he would be picking out leaders and teaching kids how to be leaders from a very young age, so that when they got into the high school, they were ready to take charge in situations where they could take charge. But he was also not a big fan of students overstepping their responsibilities, overstepping their leadership roles. That took him a while to learn, but as he learned pretty quickly, kids can easily overstep their responsibilities and try to be in more control than they need to be or that they should be. You know, the kind of the power hungry thing going on with teenagers. So that was a very successful group, team, whatever, that I participated in. And I think I learned a lot from that, recognizing people's strengths and allowing them to naturally take over something in a project is something that I try to do because I saw it work out so successfully. I'm not nearly as good at it as he was, but I still try to make use of that. And I also try to get people involved at a very young age because of this experience. And I'm not sure when I first noticed that I was doing this, but I certainly do. So if you're going to build a team, if you need to build a team to do a project, how are you going to approach it to be successful? I've told you the successful teams I've been on, but I haven't told you anything about teams that I've created. How would you go about creating a successful team to do some kind of thing, to accomplish something?
Is that a rhetorical question? Or is that a
No, that's an actual question. Let's discuss. You know, we've discussed a little bit about maybe what makes a team successful, possibly. So how do you put together a successful team? If you're trying to have a successful team, you're going to have to first build it. You're going to have to first get together the people to do it, to be members of the team. How do you do that?
I think it's different for every type of team and where it is and the people that are
Okay.
Obviously, it's very situational.
Is there anything general that we can do or that we can talk about that would work with any team? I'll give you another example. I was a sophomore when I joined the swim team. And the reason I joined the swim team was really, there was only one reason. My best friend was the captain, co-captain of the team, and he recruited me, plain and simple. He knew that I knew how to swim. He knew that I was competent enough swimmer to swim the strokes and not get disqualified and to finish the races. I was not a great athlete, but they needed bodies on the team. They needed members on the team that could survive swimming. So I was recruited and I joined the swim team. I joined because my best friend asked me to. And that's it. Now, is that a valid way to find people for a team?
I think sometimes passion, endurance, and consistency is more important than qualifications. So if I were to make a team, well, personally, I'm more of a naturally occurring team kind of person that it has to happen naturally, like the team has to be created naturally, which leads to not being involved in a lot of teams.
Yeah.
To be honest, because teams don't happen naturally common. At least on a daily life environment. Maybe if you're surrounded by people that are team oriented, it may happen. But I think definitely passion is what leads people to improve their knowledge, and it also it makes them want to go towards a goal that they share together.
Okay, so passion. First of all, when I asked the question, do you think that me being recruited by my best friend and me just doing it is valid? We had Dave here nodding his head, thinking, no, why do you think that's valid?
To just ask people to join teams.
Yeah.
I think in the beginning, you're like, they need bodies, they need people. Depending on the organization and what's up, and the reason that the team was created, sometimes, you just need people. And there's nothing wrong with just going out there and asking and casting a wide net. Someone sucks, I think, you reserve the right to kick them out, take a vote. But you can't afford as a new team to be choosing exclusive.
So there are situations that warrant this, right? And then you say passion. Well, obviously my friend had passion for swimming. He really does, still does, in fact. He still swims competitively today. Well, his most recent competitive swimming kind of thing took him to Hawaii. He actually competed in triathlons all over the United States until he qualified to go to the Ironman in Hawaii. And he's competed twice in the 40 and the 40 to 50 category, and he has completed the Ironman twice. And I think he's done doing that now. But he's very compassionate about swimming, and so compassion is or passion for this sport. Not compassion, but passion. Passion for something it turns out to be playing a huge role in both my recruiting and in his continued thing for this.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, and that often is huge. Does everyone have to have that same passion? I don't think so, but it's important that it's there.
No, but you need passion to be invited to the team.
Yeah,
People
maybe
recognize and see your efforts, and that I think inherently translates to passion.
Yeah, I think so too. I think so too. But at the very least, passion has to be there. The passion for what's somebody has to have that passion. I'll give you another example. I coached a volleyball team here at the college. When I first came, I coached volleyball for several years, and we had somebody on the team who was the heart and soul of the volleyball team. Everybody's passion was driven by her passion on both sides, both when they were excited and happy and when she was angry, because she would get angry if people did things wrong. And she was always super angry or super driven happy. She was never calm. And I know her to this day, and she's still this way. She still plays volleyball this way, and it turns a lot of people off. But people who are driven are actually driven by her to greater heights. We used to often refer to it as the cancer of the team. It's kind of like this gnawing, underlying sickness almost that drives people. And the passion was definitely there. And we went to nationals for the first time in 20 years with her as captain. And that was the main reason, was drive that she had to just push people and push people, and she never let up. And she's a nurse now. So anyway, the passion is certainly, that definitely needs to be part of it. Is there more? Is there something else that you're looking for in people that you want to be a part of a team? And other things besides passion and just willingness to be a part of it or whatever? What else are we looking for? Hunter, do you have any ideas about what you would look for if you were looking for people to be members of a team to do a project?
I personally would look for teamwork.
Okay, teamwork. So the ability to work with other people is usually what we would call teamwork, right?
Yep.
So what does that look like? What traits do you have to work well in a team? What's good teamwork traits? Go ahead.
I think, and this is just something I was thinking about, so this might not answer that question. So I think one thing to note is that you should look for people that have certain innate abilities and traits that can't be taught. And one of those things is like, someone said it, teamwork, but also the ability to learn new things and tricks. Because if somebody is unwilling to, if they don't have that open mindset that they're always right, that they can improve, they don't have that, you're never going to get anywhere with them because they can't be taught, they can't work well for this. And it's just one of those things, teams help each other, better. If someone's not willing to let others do that for them, then they're just not, so often.
So we would maybe call that a independence thing. Maybe people who are independent enough to get things done, but are dependent enough to allow others to help them with things.
Isn't there a word for that? Like for someone that is healthy, it has healthy levels of independence and dependence when working.
Probably, I don't know what the word is, but they've definitely got this. They've definitely got both of these things.
Wait, resilience.
Well, resilience is a bit different. Yeah. What other character traits might you look for in people that help them to become good team mates?
I would look for loyalty.
Loyalty?
Loyalty seems to be connected with everything else. I think loyalty and passion are connected because you're always loyal to your passions. And if you join a team that is working on a project that you're passionate about, you tend to be more loyal. I'm not saying that you're not going to, let's say, cheat.
Okay. Well, let's talk about loyalty for a bit. Usually when we talk about loyalty, we talk about being true to others, being true to ourselves, these kinds of things. And let me tell you something about another team that I participated in. This was a research team at an engineering firm that I worked for called Moxtech. And Moxtech, we created X-ray devices for NASA. And they put them on the Mars rovers onto Mars. So we put parts on Mars. And one of our team, this team was not a very big team. We had 2 production engineers, and I worked for the production engineers mostly. So I was essentially a junior student member of the team. We had 2 or 3 students that worked for the production engineers. And we had 1 or 2 students that worked for kind of the researchers, which were mostly physicists. And we had one physicist who was a professor at the university working on this team. We had another physicist who was essentially over the research and development at the actual engineering firm. Then we had another physicist who was a graduate student, and he was from Russia. And he was in charge of new product development testing, essentially testing and new ideas. And we would get together into a meeting, and the professor, who was quite old, would sleep through most of the meetings, but he was always listening somehow. He would always wake up in the middle of the meeting and have something relevant to say, and then he would go back to sleep. The research physicist who was in charge of kind of research and development, he was always kind of in charge of the meeting. He was kind of leading the meeting, leading the discussion, had everything organized. And then the third physicist, who was the guy from Russia, he was always pretty quiet until he had something that he disagreed with, and then he acted like the devil's advocate. He was always breaking down people's ideas. He was always breaking down people's methods. He was always contradicting people, constantly contradicting people. And if you sat in a meeting, you would think that he hated the rest of us and that everything that we did, he thought was garbage, because that's how it sounded all the time. He didn't sound loyal to us as people at all. At all. It was like everything we did was wrong. Everything we did was needed to be fixed. Everything we did needed to be questioned because we obviously didn't know what we were doing. Everything. And his thick Russian accent didn't help. He was also my neighbor. He was also my neighbor. What was his name? I can't remember his name all of a sudden. His name was Sergei Voronov. But anyway, his wife was super nice. He had a super funny little boy, but he was just all the time, just beating on us. And
I think that guy was been useful for the team.
he was extremely useful for the team because while he may not have sounded like your classic loyal person, as far as people go, he was extremely loyal to the project. He never allowed emotion or feelings for a person interfere with the project. The project was king when we were in those meetings. Now, when we were at a barbecue, which we were at all the time with him, he was a super nice guy. It was completely different around me, and my wife always thought I acted kind of scared around him, I guess, because I was a young undergraduate student working on this project, and he was, this 30-something graduate student who was super brutal to everybody around him. And I was intimidated by him because of this. And it took me a while to overcome that.
How do you overcome that?
Just time. You just get used to people shooting your ideas down all the time, and you start to become okay with it. It's just become something you accept. You accept as a learning opportunity. And then eventually you learn to do it yourself. You learn to point out flaws in things so that you can be a better project member. It doesn't mean that you need to be intimidating or anything like this. In fact, I've known plenty of people who were very good at pointing out mistakes and problems, but they were very nice about it. Sergey just wasn't one of them. So, but loyalty, the reason that I say this is because loyalty has different meanings, I think, to different people. And in some team environments, it may be important to be loyal to actual people, but it may be more important to be loyal to the project than the people. And that's particularly true in technical situations. It is much more important to be technically loyal than personally loyal, because being personally loyal can often lead you to be technically deficient. And in engineering, you definitely don't want that to be the case.
That's probably the reason why a lot of the scientists or engineers are not very, or don't seem to be very great at or
Well, I think it's the other way around, but you're right. I think the reason that engineers are good at being technical is because they're not empathetic.
Exactly, that's what I'm
Yeah, so, but the other, some people think it's the other way around. We're super technical people engineers, and so we're not empathetic. But I think it's the other way. I think it's actually the fact that many men are not very empathetic in general. That's a common trait among men. It's much more common among men than women, and that's why men are much better engineers, because they tend to not worry about empathy so much, and they tend to worry about getting things right more often than being right, or being this. And that's a fact of biology. It just happens to be the case. And it's one of the main reasons that men are more prominent in engineering, because they choose engineering because of those traits. It doesn't mean that they're completely void of empathy, but it is often the case that they are less empathetic.
I mean, if you look at it from a adaptation and this time, I think we're still in its plays a huge role. If you analyze your friend, your Russian friend, he was able to switch back and forth between his non-empathetic self and his empathetic or non-self.
Which most people can do. Yeah.
So I think that would be an ideal situation for someone to aspire to.
Yeah.
So
go ahead.
I have a perfect thing to go off of on that. Men versus women. I've heard the comparison before, where men have an individualized box for everything in their mind. Women, all of those boxes are tied together.
Yeah, it is.
So we can take out, the work box and think about that, only do that, and put it away. Go home, pull out that home box, and do those things separately. But women struggle to, because everything for them is interconnected. And they have interesting and different problem-solving skills. There's pros and cons to both sides.
Yeah, there are, for sure. And there definitely are many analogies for this, and that's one of them. I've heard that one as well. There's lots of things that men tend towards and women tend towards, and of course it's not a perfect 100% thing. We're all on some kind of weird spectrum and all of these things. But is there a place for this person that's super focused on one thing and tends to be less empathetic? And is there a place for the person who tends to be more empathetic all around? And that's kind of the point I'm trying to make with this group I'm telling you about, is that the Sergey guy was the one that was super focused and not very empathetic when it came to this project, specifically when he noticed a problem. Whereas the leader of the group actually was more empathetic and less focused like that. He was just naturally that way. And he tended to have a great ability to bring everyone together and to organize people and to keep us all on track, on the same page. And that's because he was working with us empathetically as people, right? And he had a very different demeanor. Everything about him was different. He always wore a suit and a tie. Always. He was always impeccably dressed. His office was impeccably organized. Okay? Everything that he did, he wrote things down. He kept track of things. He remembered things. Sergey was different. Sergey had a workspace, not an office. It was essentially a workbench with a desk attached to it and just all kinds of stuff all over the place. He was working on things all the time, working on things. Very creative person, very oriented on accomplishing these different steps to get this project done. Whereas Clark, who was our leader, he was much more about overseeing that things were getting done, not actually doing them, not actually thinking about the details of it, but overseeing things and making sure that things got done on a grander scale, that things were getting done simultaneously, that we weren't leaving out things that were important. He was also really good at marketing. He was really good at talking to people who are not scientists, but who are going to use our products. right? And looking for new ways to use them. So the point is that, you know, there are needs and reasons to have different people on teams. No matter really what you're doing, a diversity is quite important. A diversity of ideas, of abilities, of personalities is quite important, right?
I think that's the major reason why all engineers could benefit from more women being involved in engineering. Because it can, since they tend to be more empathetic and empathy is something that lacks.
And when you find women in engineering, you often find them leading groups.
Exactly.
They're not necessarily the ones doing the technical work. They're not necessarily the ones, you know, coming up with the new ideas, but they're often found as the ones speaking in front of a group and organizing the group and making sure that things get done. Okay. This happens all the time. There's a volleyball league, and it's a co-ed league. They used to have a women's league and a men's league, but the men's league would never get organized. Nobody'd ever put together teams, and people would just kind of show up, and then nobody knew what was going on. So they decided to combine it into a co-ed league, and now every year there are teams that are organized, and the person organizing the team of men and women is almost always a woman. She organizes the team, puts together the team, and they also they even make sure the teams are kind of evenly like distributed with the best players, so that the tournament is more interesting. They go that far in organizing the teams to make sure that, you know, there's kind of a competitive landscape of the league. Every year this happens, and every year it's pretty much 90% women doing the organizing, and the men show up and play. And this happens often out there. Does it mean that, you know, women are better leaders? No, it doesn't. It just means that this often happens because of their, you know, the women have this naturally more empathetic nature on average. Men tend to be more belligerent. So in positions of power that require belligerence, you see many more men dominating. You know, world leadership, politics. Politics is belligerent. Hmm?
What was the word?
Belligerent. Yeah. Aggressive. And when you're running a country, for example, aggression is important, especially if you're a country that's warlike, right? The United States has been in more wars than any country in the past 100 years, and we've only had men running our country, right? Countries that have been in fewer wars have a higher possibility of having women in leadership, women in their leadership, right? Now, whether or not that's a bad or a good thing, you know, that's for history to decide. But in the end, leadership and having a team and being successful in projects is much more complicated, I think, than we can really be put into words. My experience is that if you want to have a successful team, you need a few things to happen. You need to have somebody who is going to take charge in some way, whatever that means. Someone is going to have to lead out. And that can be for different reasons. It can be different kinds of people, but usually it has to be one person. You can't lead by committee. It doesn't work. The worst form of government in the world by far is a democracy. It is the worst form of government of all time. It causes the most trouble. It causes the most problems, and it creates the most corruption, really. It just does. We have democracies, sort of, but not really. The United States is definitely not a democracy. We have a leader. We have a leader, and they're not even chosen by any kind of democratic process. The president of the United States is not chosen by the people. They're chosen by committees, and that's all there is to it. They're chosen by the people who run for office are chosen by committees. The people who actually make it into office are chosen by committees. It has nothing to do with democracy as much as we want to think it is. All the democracies that have ever tried to run by a democracy have failed. Democracies have failed almost as much as socialist governments have failed. So democracy is terrible, and it's terrible for small groups as well. If you want everything to be a vote in a committee, it will fail. You really need essentially a competent dictatorship is what you need. And you need to have input from the group, input from the team, but you need to essentially have one person making decisions in the end. That has to be a competent dictator, somebody who's using their abilities about the project to make decisions, like you mentioned earlier, right? And that needs to be the case because someone needs to end the discussion and start the project, right? Because if it's democracy, you never end the discussion. Nobody ever will agree. The more people you have, the less agreement you have, right? This.
So when you mentioned competent dictator, this is kind of sidetracked. Reminded me of one of the many Roman dictators, Cincinnatus.
Yep.
They went to war and they basically called him off his farm. And he left for like 16 days, took care of things, did some stuff in office, and then left again. Because,
Yep.
You know,
ideally, that would be the best way to run any government or any group at all. That's what George Washington did. You know, George Washington came, led the country, really did nothing, just allowed it to happen, and made sure that nobody was breaking the laws and nobody was trying to kill America. And then he left and went back to his plantation, you know. And a few presidents have done that over time, and they've been the most successful presidents we've ever had, right? The other most successful presidents have been the ones that have come in and just been absolute dictators. They've been some of the best presidents we've ever had. They've just come in and said, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to get it done. We're going to get it done, and then I'm going to leave. And they've been great. You know, Ronald Reagan was a great president. That's pretty much what he did. That's the same Barack Obama, considered one of the great presidents of America, because that's what he did. He came in and said, I'm going to do this, this, and this. He just did it. He didn't care what anybody thought about it. And then he left. Bill Clinton was a similar. So those three are probably the three most successful presidents in my lifetime: Ronald Reagan, Bill Clinton, and Barack Obama. The three most loved presidents by the people, and the ones that actually accomplished things that they said they were going to accomplish. Whether or not you like what they accomplished is not the issue, but they did it by being dictators. That's how they did it, and it's an extremely effective way to do things. Whether or not it agrees with our sensibilities about government, it's not really the issue. It's still effective. They're very successful and effective in what they did, and it works at teams as well. You need to have somebody who's in charge, and that person needs to have absolute authority to make things happen. But that needs to be based on competence. It needs to be based on competence. So it's a kind of a competence dictatorship, right? But other things that you need people who are willing to follow. You can't have just a bunch of people who are leaders, quote unquote. You need to have people who are willing to do the project and willing to do what needs to be done and not, try to take it over. Leaders need followers, and they're just as important as the leaders. And I'm not just saying that to, make some kind of, political statement. Followers are just as important. No, they're absolutely. If you have no followers, there's no leader. A leader only is a leader if they have followers. And so you have to have people who are willing to do the work, who are willing, and that's important, right? Willing to actually get the project done. Other things that you have to have is you have to have a vision. You have to have a purpose. And that comes from organization. So either the leader himself is a very organized person, that is often the case in smaller groups, but in bigger projects and bigger groups, bigger teams, it tends to be the leader chooses somebody to be the organizer. So they have kind of underlings who organize things. And those are the people that are working in the White House for the president that nobody really knows who they are, but they're running everything. They literally are the president, but you have the president who's kind of the figurehead who makes all the speeches, and then all these people who are really smart usually, and usually quite organized and quite good at getting things done. And they're kind of They're the cogs of the machine. They make the machine work. And organization is important, whether it's the leader doing it or a leader having somebody who is doing the organization. That organization, that structure has to be there in some way or another, right? And then you have to have that driving force. There has to be something about the team or someone on the team who is that driving force, who is pushing the team towards greatness. And sometimes that's a devil's advocate in the team. Sometimes that's the leader of the team. Sometimes it's a combination of different people in different situations. But all of those things are quite important when you're trying to put together a successful team or a successful project group or something like this. You have to have those elements. Without them, usually it becomes kind of a mediocre failure of a team or not very successful. Yes, sir. One last comment.
Is the leader always the leader?
Well, that's a good question. Some people define leadership differently. I define leadership as the one that everybody looks to when they need to figure out what they're trying to accomplish, right? So they're looking to them for their guidance, not necessarily for help, not necessarily for information, but when they're saying, what is it we're trying to accomplish anyway? The leader is the one that provides whatever that is, provides that vision, right? Or they're the ones that purvey that vision, that put that vision out there, one way or the other. So
typically you would have one leader, small group, and you can have multiple leaders to take one.
yes, you can, for sure.
Plus, thinking about your question, like you said, is the leader always the leader? Sometimes you got an assigned leader that one way or another, they're in charge. Maybe they were at the company longer and they're the leader.
Yeah.
But then there's this guy who knows what's up.
And who's really,
And who everybody goes to for guidance.
Yeah.
You just said, he's the one that's actually.
yeah. So just to point towards that, another group that I'm aware of, I was very aware of as a kid, was my father's research group. So my father's research group, they required every group to have a group leader. My dad hated going to meetings and talking to people about budgets. And that's one of the things that the group leader had to do. He had to go and talk with the people that were in charge at the lab and justify their budget and all this stuff. And he hated doing that. So he assigned his best friend to be the group leader. But it certainly was not his friend's job to determine the direction that the group was going. That was my dad's job. It was also not the leader's job to go out and present the research at conferences. That was my dad's job because he was the de facto group leader, even though it wasn't his title. And that often happens in society today, where you have a group leader or a team leader or a project leader that is kind of a political figurehead, or they're just there so that they can go do the stuff that the real leaders of the group don't want to do. That often happens. So leaders in title are not always leaders in actuality, right? So that's definitely the case.
Figure out most people that take the fall, the people under them mess up.
Yeah,
That's very common.
yeah, it's true. So leadership and teams and teamwork, these things are difficult to define, but the more you think about them, the more that you talk about them, the more you observe them, and the more that you try to enact them, and the more you try to participate in these kinds of activities, the more you'll understand what you think it is and how you use these things in your life. And I don't think that there's any particular specific way of running things, but I think that there is kind of a general idea of how to approach these things. So that's for you to consider. We will talk more about the very specific things that you need to do to organize a team on Wednesday. We're going to talk about some very specific tools, and we're going to get some practice using them, and then we will move on from there. We will see you on Wednesday.